this the 11th?
I don't know. You're the guy who does the numbering up there. I think we've done 12 at this point. Have we?
You wouldn't believe if I told you that I upload them, because Lord knows, haven't been doing it. Just put up the last one like about a week ago, but before that was like a whole gap. So very behind the curve. This is the Open Discourse podcast where I, Jay, and my buddy Dave hang out and talk about something, if we have anything to talk about. And do we?
We need to, well, I guess so. We need to work on getting guests, though, because the idea of this show, as I envisioned it, we started off very political, and I think that's just the nature of the times we started it in, but
yeah,
the idea I had here was
to
get people on here to talk about stuff and then sort of civilly disagree, because I think that's something that's really missing in the modern climate. Just dialogue in general, or the lack thereof. And we've been pretty bad about that for the last like 5 or 6 shows or more.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this right now, you've got to be like one of maybe 4 people, and send any message to any of us on in any way.
Anything you want to hear us argue about, or any views you want to hear about, or if you want to come on and
exactly, it's as easy as messaging us.
Being terrible at something
problematic, uninformed, which to carry that forward is very much a theme of the show of being amateur pundits, which we always do.
Yeah, I guess that would be one way to classify this.
Yeah, it's amateur punditry. We read a little bit. Dave, I think you read a lot more than I do.
It depends on what I'm doing at work and how tired I am and how much free time I have, which as of late has been boring work, but not a lot of time, and mentally exhausted.
So this is a very low-stakes podcast that exists kind of in the margins of our lives, where we just hang out mostly.
It's conversational in feel.
Yeah.
By intent.
And so it's got me thinking. It's a little alarming, maybe just concerning, maybe totally neutral, and I'm thinking too much about it. That we don't have anything to talk about. Are either of us keeping up really, like on the news,
on
the comings
up a
and goings?
Little bit. I was keeping up with this stuff with the internet privacy rules, which that is one thing I wanted to talk about, just because I am fairly well informed on that, and it's really been getting under my skin how it's been covered and the reaction to it. And it's sort of an interesting situation where I think people are coming to the right conclusion for the wrong reasons.
The conclusion that the Trump administration is less than great, but for kind of their own...
more specific conclusions about the untrustworthiness of internet service providers and how Congress doesn't know shit about it, and this is like one of the clearest examples of votes being bought and paid for, aside from the whole Betsy DeVos thing that one of our guests talked about a while back now. And I think it's more clear-cut that people are being bought or votes are being bought just because... or votes are being bought, and there's a low-key willful ignorance, or learning just enough to justify what you're being paid to believe, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think cabinet positions are being bought, like especially in terms of Betsy DeVos.
Oh, been bought. They've all been bought.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about, because it occurred to me, like, I don't really have much to talk about for the podcast, and that means I'm politically disengaged. That's something I hear about, like, in the rhetoric on Tumblr and stuff, that is like what they want to do is burn you out. They want to make it an exhaustive experience to keep up with and maintain being, engaged and concerned about the goings on, and the shit getting passed, so that you'll just wear out and you will stop focusing on it anymore. And it was, occurring to me, like, am I doing that? Like, have I given up, I guess, on the state of things, on the outrage that like one should have seeing some of this stuff go on? Yeah, probably. I mean, to answer my own question. But now that we get talking and stuff, I actually got some more thoughts. So let's dig into what you mentioned, Dave, about
The internet privacy
the
stuff.
internet stuff. Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, I guess going on what you said super fast, I guess you could sort of justify this personally as a reason to sort of force yourself to keep up to date. Seems to be what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, internet privacy. So Congress, what everybody's been hearing is that Congress voted to get rid of internet privacy regulations that had been created by the FCC. That's partially true. The full truth is that yes, they did do it, but one, it was under the Congressional Review Act. I don't know if it's an act. I think it's just one of their functions. It was under congressional review, and these rules had not been implemented yet. So functionally, not much has changed,
Mm.
which is what's really getting under my skin. I just fused on the spot, I guess, two idioms. That everybody's acting like suddenly everything's so different, and things are a little different now. I think with how things went now, whereas before internet service providers were sort of held accountable for your information, they had to protect it. They've been sort of given the go ahead to sell it, which now means they're not really liable or responsible for it.
Yeah.
And a true libertarian would probably argue something along the lines of, "Oh, well, it's an asset. They have a fiscal responsibility to protect it because it's a financial asset. They stand to gain from it, and they only stand to lose if they don't protect it." But I don't think I buy that. And yeah, so the landscape of privacy has changed insofar as there's probably a little bit less accountability to the ISPs now with what they do with the data that they've already been collecting, that they will continue to collect. Um,
Yeah.
but it's
Like
not
it.
like suddenly everything you did was private and now it isn't. It's never been private.
I feel like the
Never.
last 4 years have been a string of like news blasts about like, oh, this happened, like internet privacy is like down again or something. Like it's
Well,
always,
it's because
I don't know.
people
I
don't really understand it. So I think
Yeah.
what you're talking about are the SOPA, PIPA, and CISPA acts, which were all under the auspices of stopping online piracy.
Hmm.
What most people didn't really see was that these were funded primarily through big movers and shakers in the music industry and Hollywood because, obviously they don't want people getting their stuff for free, right? God
Yeah.
forbid if they just make their stuff more available at more convenience,
Yeah.
piracy goes down. And as we've seen since those bills have clearly not worked, um, things like Netflix have been catching on. HBO has whatever they call their Netflix competitor with their shows only. Amazon launched Amazon Prime Video, which has been snatching up stuff from Netflix or to compete with Netflix left and right. This is where
Hmm.
it's going, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it's going to be curious to see how it pans out.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the privacy stuff, nothing's changed, and I'm really irritated that everybody thinks that it's such a huge shakeup in how privacy works. It's not. It's a minor shakeup with the responsibility I was talking about earlier being shifted.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as I can tell, nothing's changed. Your internet service provider has always been collecting your data. They will continue to collect your data. What I do think is good, though, and this is why I said right conclusion for the wrong reasons, a lot more people now are starting to get angry about internet privacy and about, digital rights.
Yeah.
And outside of the context of bullying and harassment, which is to me is a tricky subject because it's so hard to pin down what is and what isn't. And the instant you automate the process, it becomes even more troublesome. But this is very clear cut. Uh, and so hopefully, not much has happened yet, but hopefully, I've thrown some money at the EFF, the electronic. Oh God, I'm blanking out. I
Freedom
want.
Foundation. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. So that sounds about right. Freedom electronic. Yeah, something. It's a. It fights along the lines or on the internet privacy and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
Trump has recently. Sean Spicer has confirmed that net neutrality rules are next on their list. And to me, that's a bigger deal.
That is yeah, the main thing I was hearing about recently. Like I was hearing like quick little news things about the I would say cesspool of Reddit's pro Donald Trump page, r the Donald, was really eating itself alive in this piranha swarm of
Yeah, well, and see,
that stuff coming out, the
this is
net
something I
neutrality.
was telling to my parents is that there will always be the crazy like cult of personality Donald Trump supporters, like the people who will just support him no matter what, because
Yeah,
they worship and idolize him as a person, which to me is unthinkable, but people are that way,
yeah.
and
So the
and
net neutrality
but
thing.
bit by bit he's been alienating supporters that were
Yeah,
sort of from groups that were aligned with him on like one or two things, like which has always been the Republican strategy. Well, not always. As long as I can remember, it's been the Republican Party strategy to get the single issue voters. But they've
yeah,
always tried very carefully to keep those single issue voters. So in this election, his single issue voters were people who were concerned about their jobs in rural America, and he's alienated them with the healthcare debacle
hmm,
and the stuff he said about unions.
yeah,
And
and
well, I alienating. It's still happening, and his internet support group, I think, is mostly grown from anti PC, anti SJW, anti feminist types that are. You might jump on me for saying this. I think somewhat justified in feeling put off by the leverage that the left and particularly more fringe left views get in parts of the internet and online discussion and stuff like that. You know, people who are pissed off all the time at sites like Kotaku and Polygon. You know, the whole GamerGate thing, I think, was really the
yeah.
start of that attitude.
So I'm familiar with the sphere of people and like that mentality that goes into it and stuff, and I'm not gonna jump on you because I understand like what their logic is, but I'm not going to. Uh, but like it was so react like I don't know, just
Well, it's
deconstructionist about everything. Wait, let me get my head straight
yeah.
on a
Sorry,
second.
sorry.
Because like I'm not gonna. I just definitely wouldn't say that like any it's rationalizable, but it's not justifiable to me. And I'm not gonna like exert any sympathy for these dudes getting torn up because their guy who was their presidential candidate who was fighting all of the SJWs and PC culture and everything that they hated has turned around and started hammering down the pillars that they were trying to keep up, like certain topics like net neutrality and stuff. So now they're eating themselves alive because this guy wasn't really out for them at all.
No, he paid lip service to the stuff that he knew. He, Donald Trump, I think he's an idiot, but he's very good at manipulating people. He is
Yeah,
a master showman.
and that was
He's
like
been a
what.
successful TV guy for his whole life, for the most. Well, not his whole life, a lot of his life.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate like success of it was like really galvanizing this internet culture of like angry dudes like to fight for him and then just being like, all right, great, well I'm here, I'm
I mean,
going to keep doing whatever
I don't
we
know
wanted.
about angry dudes. I would just say angry people. I try to not assume sex through the internet
Well,
unless explicitly stated.
Well,
Because
neither
I
do I
think
when I
I
say
think the
dudes. There's all
fair.
kinds.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I think you mentioned this to me at one point about dudes being a gendered term or not, and how it's such in like this weird in between place.
Yeah, it's
Um,
dubious.
but yeah, and I think the problem is it's an extreme reaction to a I would classify it as an extreme problem, but it's I think it's overcorrecting, and I hope people are starting to wake up. But I say it's an extreme problem because I think censorship is always an extreme problem.
Mhm.
It's how authoritarianism grows, and I am aware of the argument of censorship being something only the government can impose, that free speech is only a right when it comes to the government preventing you from speaking. But I would disagree with that argument. I would say free speech is a principle. It is a right guaranteed us by the, is it the Constitution or one of the Bill of Rights? Probably the Bill of Rights. Um, but I think it's a principle, and I find it discouraging when online platforms and entities don't support uh, that ethos, I guess would be the appropriate word, that
Mhm.
the principle of free speech. Though I understand that private entities are well within their rights to do what they want, and we are just using their stuff. But I still feel it's a shame when it happens.
Yeah. And so, like, ironically, these like internet communities that were so out for having their free speech, fighting back against the uh, I guess, the cultural and social limitations of their ability to speak, um, are now kind of faced down with this, loss of net neutrality that like the corporations
The
and the
potential
ISPs,
loss, yeah.
yeah, are like going to be theoretically with the laws of net neutrality, which is why it is a problem, like have the ability to institute higher levels
Well,
of
and this goes
limitations,
to,
like on.
I do not understand the why we treat corporate entities the way we do in this country. I can't speak to how other countries treat them. I've lived overseas, but I was too young to recall, the political goings on when I lived not in the U.S. Um, but I don't understand this notion of, even before a Citizens United and all this bullshit about corporations being people and money being equal to speech, because we've gone over that in a previous episode.
Yeah,
Even before that, we treat them so strange, like as if they have our best interests in mind. They
yeah,
don't. I don't see it that way. The way
never,
I
like,
imagine corporations, the way I picture them, the way I've seen them behave, is if you studied international politics a little bit. They behave in much the same way a small nation would, a nation state, or just a state, really, because they're
yeah,
not. There's no unifying identity other than profit and a brand. Um, but they have their own internal power structure. They have their own uh, motives and incentives, and those, especially in the era of international corporations, they don't align with that of any single country. And
yeah,
to treat them the way we do, to give them such preferential treatment and a place on the floor when we write our legislation, to me is just baffling. This is not the gilded, and I say this a lot. I've probably said this in one of our previous episodes, but this is not the gilded age. This is not the time when J.P. Morgan can single-handedly resuscitate the American economy multiple times. This is not the times when, under the auspices of social Darwinism, which in and of itself is a loaded concept, the rich elites of that time period would engage in philanthropy. Their personal motives could be dubious, but it was still philanthropy. They were still giving back, and they were employing Americans, and they were proud to be Americans, and they were proud to make build into America
Yeah.
as a like nation, building into it, at making it bigger, making it better. We don't live in those times anymore. I would argue that a lot of these people are relics of the Cold War, from the 50s and to the 90s at some point. And even then, I guess there was some of that there because we hadn't entered that international period yet, because we were, it was the Cold War. It was the communist versus the democratic, the democratic societies, I suppose. Uh, and so there was still that thought process, and I guess it made more sense because when you're fighting communism, of course, a capitalistic entity is not going to want to work, not going to want to lose to communism. That's bad for them.
Yeah. So I kind of lost the thread on that there.
On what?
On corporatism.
Oh yeah, sorry. I
I
had a
kind of on the
point.
whole
I
thing.
had I had a point, and I lost myself. And I was gonna say, there's all these people who they believe in deregulation, because they believe in the concept of a limited government, and theoretically, I agree with those concepts. I think a limited government is hypothetically a good thing, but when
I
I
mean, you
think
can't
what a
have an
lot of
unlimited government, like
right,
Christ.
right, that's a totalitarian nightmare. But what I was
But
getting at is that I think a lot of people don't seem to perceive corporate entities the way I do, as nations unto themselves, states unto themselves, power structures unto themselves. And suddenly, even though they're not maybe looking at it the way I am, they're suddenly being forced to confront this idea that, well, crap, we thought the government was this big deal, but suddenly there's all these other groups that are like big movers and shakers in our
yeah,
lives, and we've just been ignoring them.
yeah, like so much focus is put on the like power exerted by the government, especially like the president, but like there's probably so much more either directly through their own power or like through lobbying into government that corporations have like over your daily life and your lifestyle that is not like I mean from who you work for to like actually existing in the world to God like the deepest core of the culture. You were talking about how like absurdly generous culturally like our whole country is like probably and I definitely would like say like more than any other country like developed country they are to like corporations as though they are these like benevolent like grand elf deities or whatever um that I think it is kind of like obscene like how they have the corporations as they exist in the form of I don't know like a nation state or like a semblance of a person whatever that means. That was always such an abstract concept to me, a corporation as a person. I don't really understand all the implications of that.
Well, it's
That
sort of a transitive property thing. The underlying assumption is that money is equal to speech, and
yeah
that in a capitalist society, you can speak with your purchasing power as a consumer, which is fine. That makes some sense. But then the logic behind corporations being people and therefore their free speech, aka money, should not be restricted, is a little more dubious. And it's that, oh, well, a corporation is made up of people.
yeah I mean like it is but like the it's just
Yeah,
a
but
generate it's like a perfect environment like of a total empathy vacuum like they talk about it's easy to separate yourself from a sense of responsibility if like it takes 5 steps to like launch a drone missile that 5 different people have to do so none of them individually like can be held responsible for anything it's like you're always gonna think you're the one dude in the firing squad who maybe was the one with the fake bullet that it's the perfect environment that a corporation can consist of people, but they all have their own like very narrow set of responsibilities, like and
Well,
consequences in the system that like it is easy to factor out. Like it is easy to disassociate yourself and your ethics from the actions and effects of the corporation that leads the corporation as an entity, as a human, as a fake human semblance, as a nation state to give nary a shit about the people insofar as they make money. And what I wanted to talk about is how insidiously uh, that infects the culture to the like our value of uh, corporations as these like bizarre like descended benefactors or something that people will like normal people like people who have no stake in the success or failure of a corporation will come like ravenously, if that's the right word, to the defense of corporate freedom to do fucking corporate whatever the fuck they want to do. Like I've just heard recently a lot good people like for instance like just defending, just arguing for the benefit of corporations that like they I guess do not as individuals have any reason to defend, but that's just so baked into the culture that any like for a lot of people like the regulations on a corporations
hmm
uh is this like it's just such inherently like immediately poisonous thing that it becomes like a threat to uh corporate freedoms becomes a and when I say it like that it sounds like a good thing. Corporate freedoms, it's a corporate blank check to fuck the world apart. That any threat to that is a threat to them personally. I've just heard people like defending the rights of, or not even the rights. The rights is not even the right word. Defending the ludicrous privilege that the extremely wealthy in our country have. Like there was literally a conversation with a guy. I was not involved. I was sitting in the corner, like trying to not get involved in a big political discussion. I save that for here,
Yeah.
who like was very seriously defending that theoretically billionaires don't have to pay a higher fine than normal people for, say, I mean, in this situation, it was a, drunk driving fine. I had, well, I don't want to spill any beans. I know someone who got a DUI and it's like a $10,000 fine or something. This guy is lucky he avoided jail time. But he's paying back the state. He's paying back his parents a lot who bailed him out.
hmm
Um, and it's, and he's not a money maker. Like he's scraping by and it hit him in the fucking guts. Like, and so in that way, fines work as a profound financial incentive to not commit crimes.
Right.
So, great for that. And he was arguing like, shouldn't the financial in, the financial disincentive to commit a crime should hit a billionaire at the like hit a billionaire as hard as it would hit him because you don't, kill fewer people by driving into a building drunk if you're a billionaire. But the $10,000 fine is something you can brush off like easy, and also afford better lawyers and stuff, and skate past it. So they have like a much smoother ride through crimes. And anyway, that's the long setup to the fact that this other guy who like by no means was like the 1% himself is defending like that he poses the argument that like so the rich should be punished for being richer by having to pay more, and then that's not what it is. It's not like a punishment. I mean, it's a
Yeah, no,
punishment
no, no.
because
I get what you're saying. They're not being punished for being rich. They're being punished for committing a crime.
yeah, and it has to scale like you know if,
No, yeah, you're right. The logic of incentivizing people or disincentivizing people only works with economies, or not with economies of scale, when scale is applied because, somebody who makes minimum wage and works a full time job making minimum wage, $10,000 is going to hit a lot harder than, Donald Trump, for example.
yeah. Yeah, and like Donald Trump, who is theoretically like guilty or at least indictable of a million different things, not the least of which is treason. Um, but Christ, like, and this my point about this is this dude just like jumps to the defense of the super wealthy, and I'm like, why do
Well,
you feel compelled to like make that argument for them? Like,
well,
what?
it's a paradigm that you could certainly date back to Reagan, but I would say probably dates back even further of the wealthy and by extension corporations as not only successful but as job creators. That term, you always hear it used: job
Ugh.
creators, job creation. You know, a job is an imaginary thing at the end of the day. They're not created out of nothing.
Then 9 times out of 10
Well,
are
no,
being
no, no. They
created
are
by,
created out of nothing. I'm sorry, they are.
yeah.
Um,
Well, they're
and
creative out of,
and this idea of job creation and of the super rich and the super wealthy and the corporation as sort of a consumption generator. You know, the idea that they generate goods and services to consume and in turn consume an equal number of goods and services. You know, that's trickle down economics. That's the most basic form of that mindset, the least nuanced form of that mindset. Because
yeah.
trickle down economics didn't work. A lot of people will admit that. Even a lot of people who are staunch conservatives will admit trickle down didn't work. Though but they still ascribe to similar points of view. Though nobody has dared to say trickle down until, of course, Donald Trump. But that's where that mindset comes from, is that when people have a lot, that will sort of find its way into the market and into the average citizen's benefit through consumption and through trade in capitalism. But it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Man. God, trickle down economics, all this stuff. Like I hear people talk about jobs as though that is the end all be all, like of what the world should be is more jobs, more jobs, more jobs. I understand, like, manufacturing has left the country, unemployment is a significant problem, but like, first off, I don't think jobs are the end all be all. Like I get that a lot from my dad, who's a big proponent of fossil fuel industries and stuff, and that's a lot of that's like that, at least tangential to a lot of the work he does. Um, so yeah, he has his own certain vested interest in it. Anyway, but like it's the sort of thing, like, you're not wrong. Like, yeah, corporations, like, being able to spend money on new projects and new hires and new things, like that theoretically, like, they can do that and they should be doing that, and they're not doing that is the goddamn problem about it.
Right.
Too many corporations, super rich corporations and super rich individuals, stash all of their fucking money in Cayman Islands accounts like it's this fucking
Well,
pinball high score
that's
that they
what.
never
Yeah.
that they sit on and that they never do anything with. If they cycled it back down into the world, then that would, yeah, be an
Well,
effective
that's
form
sort
of
of
trickle down economics.
that's sort of what I meant when I said it's all an outdated model in my perspective.
I
It's
think
something that worked before technology made automation so easy. It's something that worked before globalization made outsourcing so easy, and dodging fees and taxes and what have you so easy for the people who could afford to.
and
Uh,
I
it's an
think
outdated
theoretically,
model.
like, I think theoretically, trickle down economics could function and could be beneficial in the way it supposedly should be. But um, it's just not like the fucking, like, the airline bailouts that I hear about. And I'm not, dear listener, I'm not well read on it. I don't know exactly what it is. But as far as I know, what happened was that, like, the all of the airlines were like doing bad or something, or just like the airline corporations were fucking up somehow, And they were like, oh boy, if we don't get bailed out by the government, we'll have to lay off all of these people. That would sure suck, wouldn't it? That's the opposite of creating jobs. Unemployment is a problem. And so the government bailed them out with billions and billions and billions of dollars. And they
They still fired a whole
still,
bunch of people.
and they
Yeah.
still fired a whole bunch of people. It did not, like, that. It's, it, like, I don't know. It's a certain delusion that, like, they say, like, oh, we only care about creating jobs. They don't. They could give half of a shit. The more jobs they have, the more employees they have to pay, and they don't want to do that. They want to hoard all their money and sit on it, like the fucking rich that we should be eating. You know? Christ, where was I going with this? There was a
Nowhere.
visual metaphor that I saw that was like what trickle down economics like should be. There was a pyramid of wine glasses, like you may find at a well catered event. It was like a pyramid of wine glasses, and the one at the top was like getting wine poured into it, and it overflowed into the lower and lower and lower down things. But the point of it was that the wine glass on top was the same size as the rest of the wine glasses. The next visual image to extend this metaphor was the wine glass on top slowly getting larger and larger, like expanding itself
Right.
to like hold more of the wine so that none was trickling like down to the other ones. And then someone threw in the comment that like then when the top wine gets too heavy and it crushes the bottom glasses, it's gonna blame the bottom glasses for
For being
not
weak.
being strong
Well,
enough. Yeah,
we've already seen that, with the healthcare thing when people suddenly started getting pissed off because they started realizing they were going to lose their healthcare in these Republican states. I think it was Jason Chaffetz, I think is how you say his last name. He was like, "Oh, well, you need to stop buying iPhones." That's not a one-to-one comparison. I mean, I
that
agree. I think iPhones are crap, but his logic is you should stop buying nice things if you want to stay alive.
that rhetoric burns my ass for the rest of my life. I will be in the fourth ring of hell, and my ass will be on like a bed of coals or something because of that shit that people say. Because like theoretically, an iPhone is $700, and that's generous. That's like AT&T and stuff. They'll like give you shit for cheap, and you do a plan, and it's all this shit. There is so much that you can do with access to computers and access to the internet. I think that's itself a highly undervalued resource in terms of basic lifestyle and basic infrastructure in the world we currently live in. If you are theoretically like a very impoverished person and you do not have access to the internet in any capacity, that is making everything a million times extra harder. So, but like you spend $700 maybe on a computer or on a cell phone or any creature fucking comfort aside from that. Like people were talking about refrigerators
Yeah, no.
in
If
poor
you
people's
if you spend
houses.
any
Like
amount of money on anything nice to the people who think this way, you
it's not even
somehow
nice.
you somehow forfeit
Don't you think
the basic needs. Well, I say nice, but I mean like those things that are sort of for some reason considered a luxury, but functionally are a necessity the way society works.
yeah.
Stuff like a car if you're in a rural area, or uh, you know, a phone with internet access. Because let's be honest, you need internet access. And the very poor people, they don't buy computers, they buy a phone and they have a data plan. That's just
Yeah.
how they do it. Because
And
it's cheaper than a computer and an internet service plan.
and it's like a one-time like $700 phone theoretically, right? Like if healthcare was a one-time $700 purchase, you better believe people would sell their phones to get that healthcare and then theoretically be set for the rest of their life on that one-time $700 healthcare. But, fucking it's absurd. It's because what healthcare is thousands, if not tens of thousands, Christ, if not hundreds of thousands, Lord knows if you need chemotherapy or something. In the United States, it's absurdly expensive, and you can't afford healthcare or basic living or basic any kind of lifestyle security by giving up creature comforts or internet access. It's fucking
Yeah.
absurd the way these people are so fucking disconnected, like so in their own world where they're like, well, how can you be poor and have a refrigerator? That's what I heard recently. The discourse was about like, oh, you see these poor people's houses, but they all have refrigerators and microwaves. Like, man, a microwave costs like $50. I don't know, and you
More to the
can
point,
cook.
especially if you're poor, you're gonna need that microwave. Are you kidding?
Can have have you ever lived, Dave, in a house without a refrigerator? And do you ever think like that you could live in a house without a refrigerator?
I
In
did
terms of,
briefly. When I lived in Peru, we did not have a fridge at first for like a
oh,
week.
is that for
Yeah.
a week, and then you got a
Yeah,
fridge?
I mean, it wasn't like a permanent situation, but I have experienced it.
Let me tell you, and this, well, this my argument is going to sound like I'm talking shit at all on their house. I stayed over the summer with at a farm in Jamaica, and it was a lovely place with lovely people. I don't mean to say that they're like impoverished or anything. That's Christ, that's not what I'm getting at. I really don't want it to come off like that. But like their property was like a series of like small shacks with great lifestyle stuff in it. But like you wouldn't like I don't know. It was just a very small, like totally open air, like building with a pretty recent like refrigerator, like an oven set, because you need that shit to live and have food. I guess I think that's I don't know what world these I don't know politicians or whatever live in where their what is their baseline for what you need to survive and like what you need to live in a house if you are like
Well,
most impoverished person.
I think it just goes back to politicians in general being out of touch.
Extremely.
You
I
know,
can't.
I don't know if you know this, but to me, this is the most appalling thing: is that when Congress members get a salary for life, even after they're done being Congress members.
Oh
Were you
God,
aware
that
of
actually.
that?
Even
That's super fucked.
even after they probably get book deals and shit anyway. They don't need that anyway.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like, you keep talking about waste. Well, there's some waste right there.
Yeah, like any form, like like fucking George Bush needs anything, like needs that president pension anymore.
Right. Well, I don't know if the office of the president gets it. I think it might just be Congress, but I'm not sure. Not
Oh,
an expert.
well,
Um,
none of us are.
yeah.
God, so I could like I don't feel the need to defend the rich at all. And this is, I guess, kind of self-serving now, but like fucking I mean like my parents are like really well off and they have the money to send me and my siblings to college and support us, so I'm like wicked crazy fucking privileged. And I don't know, I don't want this to be like an I'm better than these people thing, but I've never had the need to disparage the impoverished while defending the super wealthy.
No, you're just owning up to like where you're coming from. I don't think you're disparaging anyone.
Thanks. And also these people in Jamaica, like the lifestyle is naturally different there. It's a different country. It's in the tropics. Like you can, you don't need like an enclosed air house or something. The weather is like great. Everything works.
Yeah.
But like they had electricity. They had like a refrigerator and an oven and everything. And like they had Wi-Fi even like only in a small area of it. But anyway, I don't know. I think more is, and it's been fucking. I can't believe the refrigerators came in as an argument piece that like the poor shouldn't theoretically have
Well, I
refrigerators,
mean
that they
that's
should
that's
sell.
approaching the level of ridiculousness of the congressman who walks into Congress with a snowball and says, "It's snowing outside. Global warming can't be real."
It's absurd. You know, and I figure any politician is making those arguments as a rhetorical device. They don't necessarily believe it, but they're like appealing to some mentality of some constituents somewhere somehow. And that just I don't assume that any of the politicians actually believe that stuff, but they're appealing to the people that will believe it based on some idea, some ire that this group of like normal people out in the real world have for the poor, which they like fucking shouldn't, I guess. And I don't know, it's all baffling, it's all very upsetting,
Hmm.
and I get pissed off about it.
Yeah, I noticed.
But like, man, fucking kill me if I ever care more about the rich than the poor. That's so un-Jesus, honestly. Like,
Yeah,
very conservative,
that's
very
something that's
religiously
really
focused.
interesting to me
Uh,
how they reconcile that.
yeah,
Like the evangelical voting bloc that is traditionally voted for like the Republican Party, fiscal conservatism, and in more recent years, the more extreme Christians voting in for the Tea Party. You know, if you're so religious, what happened to all that stuff Jesus talked about? Now, granted, I am no expert on Jesus and the New Testament. In fact, I never had any formal education in either.
no.
But
Like, but even picking up just from hearing
which
about Jesus
you
on the
know,
street.
to brief aside here, growing up, especially in the South, I always heard that the God of the Old Testament was, the more angry God,
He was a dick.
the spiteful God.
He
The
would
one
fuck you up for nothing.
who did bad shit to people for little to no reason. But
Yeah.
to me, and that the God of the New Testament was, like the forgiving God. But to me, it was always the reverse. The New Testament is where hell is formally made into a concept. Eternity is a long time to suffer for a finite period of time where you either disagreed with God entirely or you committed however many sins you committed. And they're like, oh, well, he'll forgive everything. And it's like, if you ask, that doesn't
Yeah.
sound like loving and forgiving to me. Like,
It's
yeah, the smite happy God of the Old Testament, yeah, he did some awful shit. Look no further than the story of Lot. But, I mean, I don't
Yeah, wasn't
know.
Lot the guy who just got shit on constantly and was expected to have faith, and he still
Yes.
did, even
Yes.
though he just got shit on constantly.
Yes.
And like
And,
nobody ever came around to give him his like big check or something. You'd be like, you did it, you persevered. No.
yeah, it was literally like a bet between God and the devil. But,
Where they just it turns into a lesson where the culture of that just expects you to put up with theoretically endless amounts of
bullshit.
yeah.
Well, but I'm just saying I don't buy that the Old Testament God is worse than the God of the New Testament. I see it the other way around.
Hmm.
The whole burn in fiery pits forever. Although that is a more modern take on hell. If you look back to Dante's Inferno, it wasn't an inferno all the way down.
Yeah, it
um,
got they had like different like weird
well,
parts of it that were like
the
more
bottommost part of
uncomfortable waiting room
well
than torture pit.
the bottommost part of hell was cold.
Yeah,
Most notably, but
God, my
um,
and I remember that like I remember from that fucking book that like Satan was like frozen like up to his waist in ice
he had multiple heads.
and what they did was they like found like a little ladder like that goes under the ice or something and like his legs were just dangling down
Yep,
there. It's
yep, yep.
fucking presumably big ol' like monster goat dick hanging out or something, Satan
Yeah,
shit.
but
But
yeah, I'm just saying I don't buy that.
yeah, I feel you. Like
I
there's
could
never
there's no objective way to say you're dead wrong, but
yeah. There's
um,
never been like a really ethically sound period in the Bible, but at least and those listening, I was not raised terribly religious either. I went to Bible camp for some summers as a kid, but I never really took church seriously. Anyway, but fucking like there was the one thing Jesus said was like, oh, it would be easier for a rich man to oh wait, no, it would be easier to put a camel through the head of a needle than it would be for a rich man to get into heaven. Like that was literally one of his lines, where
oh
he's like
really?
where it's like the rich are inherently like unethical because they have so much when some people have so few. Like Jesus's ethos was like, hey, if you have, do absolutely everything in your life, everything in your power to give to people that have less than you, and like that is an ultimate like divine thing, is like to care and to sacrifice everything that you have to help other people, which Jesus did by dying, I guess. Um, and yeah, so to bring it all back, there is a huge amount of cognitive dissonance to you know the right wing politicians who love Jesus and such so
And hate
much
the
on the
poor.
surface, and yeah, and really do not live by a tiny bit of like any actual Jesus rhetoric. And as I said about like theoretically, like we talked about like the right's like classist undertones and stuff. I think that to a certain extent that is like a gambit to gain like political support or something that is not. I mean, not necessarily like any of them individually. Not that it's at all excusable, because they say shit like that and support that kind of whack culture, about hating on the impoverished, but also that religiosity is a mask they fucking wear to appeal to people when living by not a single fucking thing
I'm
of
sure.
the
I'm
actual
sure that's
religion.
the case for some of them.
Yeah. It's just a gambit. It's just a move. It's just like, you know, a fucking politician wears a Homestuck shirt to appeal
Oh
to the
God.
rabid Homestuck fans. Doesn't
Ugh.
mean he actually like ever reads that fucking comic. Lord knows I don't. But like it's just faking it. It's just faking it. I'm yeah. That's all I have to say about that. Much like the Forrest Gump.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Christ.
Well,
Jesus
hmm.
wants you to give away all your money, because that's what compassion is called. You know.
Okay. Um. So I get the feeling we've been levying a lot of criticism at the right portion of the political spectrum, but to sort of turn the tables and throw some at the left,
Okay.
I don't. Going back on what we touched on earlier with the anti crowd, and when I say anti, I mean because they're defined more by what they're against than what they're for, in my opinion. Anti feminists, um,
Social justice.
anti social justice, stuff like that, and the whole free speech issue,
Hmm.
and touching on the fact that we talked about religion earlier. The most fringe elements of the right have a religious fervor, and I would say that same dogmatic behavior and thinking is present in the more extreme elements of the left. The whole the elements that are famous for shutting down discussions online and on campus, for calling up people and getting them fired from their jobs for disagreeing, shit like that.
Yeah.
And I just, I don't well, I guess when you're a part of it, you don't see it. I was going to say, I don't understand how you can't see it, but I guess what characterizes these extremes is a lack of self examination, which is really what bothers me the most, I think.
Hmm. Okay.
And that they both engage in behaviors that they criticize the other side for, but they're both equally guilty of doing the same bullshit. Um, and I don't know what else there is to say there, though, really, without saying anything I haven't said before. With the whole concept of um, intersectionality taken too far, like you're not allowed to speak to someone else's, like another group's experience because you haven't lived it. Well, yeah, but you're also understating the human capacity for empathy. And that's a spiel I've given before.
Yeah, but I think with something like that, like in that specific instance, it's also a lot of just who's the most heard in the discourse. When it comes to something like that, like it's not to say that they are like the more privileged are like unable to empathize, but just that like back off from the microphone,
No, I agree. In
so to say.
theory, it makes sense, but in practicality and in function and how it's applied, I just see people taking it too far. You
Uh,
know, it doesn't make sense to me why I shouldn't be allowed to speak, period, about an issue if it doesn't directly relate to me. In fact, to me, it's almost contradictory to the whole purpose of activism. The whole purpose of activism is not just to make something happen, it's to grow in power, accumulate allies, and then make something happen. If your
yeah,
whole thing is, if you're not exactly like us, you can't be a part of us, well, then what are you doing? What are you accomplishing?
I've never been like personally exposed to that like exclusionary uh, sense of it, but I thinking about this, like I definitely like I don't know, I've definitely internalized enough of like an understanding of like, where I'm privileged and how to the effect that like it gives me an anxiety about uh I don't know, overstepping like
Okay,
on the
well,
discourse
this
like
this
that.
goes back to the whole dogmatic thinking that I was mentioning earlier, because I grew up Jewish in the South. I've had people telling me I've been going to hell since kindergarten. I have been having people offer to save my soul so long I don't even remember. And I
Yeah.
fucking know the concept of original sin when I see it. And the idea of privilege makes sense. I will grant them that. But the way it is used, it is levied. It is used as a bludgeon against people, much the same way original sin is used as a bludgeon to guilt people into doing what the powers that be in the religion want. And to me, that's not okay. If you have to resort to short circuiting someone's emotional processes and bypassing their logical thought to get them to do what you want, you're fucking dishonest.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, do you not see that the whole concept of privilege of being white giving you privilege, it makes sense in theory, but the whole idea of being white and not being allowed to be a part of the solution, being made fun of and I guess disparaged when you try to participate in activism and causes, I, I don't get it. It's just the same shit as like the people who show up to my door saying, have you do you know you're gonna burn in hell forever if you don't do what we say?
Yeah.
Their difference is you're gonna suffer for your privilege forever if you don't give us what we want. And I just the goal should be equality, and I just see that the well has been tainted because I think a lot of people mean well, but the well to me appears to be tainted by people who just want. And this is just the problem that comes with any sort of organized power structure or any sort of large organization. Organized religion. A lot of people who object to organized religion will say, "Oh, well, the philosophy or the teachings of the religion are fine, but the people who are the powers that be within that religion in the material world, I disagree with."
Hmm.
And that goes back to what I've said before, where I agree with the premise of Black Lives Matter, but I don't necessarily agree with the fact that it's an organization now and what that organization stands for. And I'm not
Yeah.
jumping on the All Lives Matter bandwagon, because I think Black Lives Matter points to a very real, very specific problem. But
But I think I see what you're saying is that like in a lot of cases like the theory is sound but the practice becomes corrupt
precisely.
by overzealousness or gatekeeping or
It's a little.
other.
It's a little of all of it. It's overzealousness. It's gatekeeping, and it's bad act. I think it's just something about human societies, or humans just tend to organize ourselves in that the people who rise to the top are not necessarily the most benevolent people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah,
You know, the people who
that's
seek power get power. And the question is, why do they seek power? And the answer, more often than not, is for power's sake, or, to secure more for themselves.
yeah, it's never a very humanitarian like reason.
And now, of
Um,
course, there are exceptions to that rule, but when people grow to prominence, I always sort of find myself questioning, okay, well, what are their motives here? Like, what are they not saying?
yeah, which is exactly in the case
And
of
I think society and the left does a good enough job of questioning the right and religion and organized religion, and when when it comes to those questions. But I think I'm seeing those patterns emerge in the left as I'm growing older, as I'm growing more aware of the world around me, and it's troubling that I don't see that any degree of self-examination. And I'm not seeing it coming from the right either, because in my mind, the ideal political or the ideal healthy society, no one side is 100% correct. There is no one side that gets their way 100% of the time ever, because I think that is the hallmark of an unhealthy society, an unhealthy system of organization, of the society, of government, what have you. The
yeah,
ideal ecosystem would be, an exchange of ideas and compromise. Side
a
A gets some of,
discourse.
yeah, a side A gets some of what they want, but in exchange side B gets some of what they want, and we meet somewhere in the middle so that everybody's not necessarily happy, but they can deal with it, they can bear it. And we don't have that, as far as I can tell.
Hmm.
It seems like it existed at one point and it's going away. And the left used to be sort of gatekeepers of that. When I read through history books, the political activism that was in the 70s over the war and stuff like that. And even going further back, activism over child labor laws. The left was the side that cared about people's rights and about, making sure everybody got their time in the spotlight and, got their fair share. And granted, there were problems. It was not perfect. You look at feminism, and it was very much concerned with, like, housewives, white housewives,
Yeah.
for a while, and that's a very real criticism. But I don't see anyone taking the left to task for starting to deviate from that, and it just it bothers me.
Yeah. Hmm. Do you like so what do you think to improve on that though? Like higher introspection, like higher
Well, I think everybody just needs to be more self-examining. Movements and people, and I say this about individuals too. If people were more willing to take a moment and just think through fully what they were going to say and do before they did it, I think the world would be a much better place. But I think that's fairly evident and self-evident, really. I think most people on some level would agree with that. The
uh,
problem is nobody stops to think, well, maybe I need to do it more. Maybe the group I agree with needs to do it more.
hmm, I agree with.
Well, and that goes back to, our discussion on hate speech that we had a few episodes ago. Yeah, sure, forbidding hate speech is all well and good when you and the powers that be agree on what hate speech is. But, we got Donald Trump for president now, and I think it's pretty evident that he has a very different opinion on what is hate speech and what isn't.
Yeah.
And that his
Hmm.
administrators and his judges have a very different opinion.
Get a different opinion on what a lot of things are. I'm trying to
You're trying to
yeah,
wrap your head around it. I can hear the gears turning.
I am, and man, gears ain't working great.
Well, and yeah.
I mean to go off of like what you experience on the left in terms of like in the discourse and like the social discourse and stuff, the
Mm-hmm.
like we talked about like some kind of tribalism, like gatekeeping, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, I have not like experienced. I've never had anyone like
Well,
outwardly
have you
tell
ever
me.
had anyone cite you for a microaggression? And I say cite, it probably wasn't such a formal process, but
Call me out in any capacity.
sure, yeah.
Not off the top of my head, I can't think.
Well, then you've. I guess some of this is just because I'm very into like heavy political discussions, so I sort of throw myself into dangerous waters. But
Yeah,
I'm coming more from a standpoint of I grew up in the South in a fairly conservative suburban environment, and I was considered liberal. And I got to a liberal arts college in the Northeast of the U.S. North, yeah, Northeast, and I was
hmm
considered conservative.
yeah.
And
Meanwhile, like
so
you
I've
feel you
I've
paid your
been
dues to leftism
yeah,
in general.
I've been on the receiving end of scorn from both sides. Like, oh, you think people should have the right to abort people? Wow, you're a goddamn murderous scumbag. And then on the other side, well, oh, geez, you think, oh, what was it? I'm trying to remember. Uh, oh, you think people should be allowed to say hate speech? You murderous scumbag.
The plight of the centrist.
I suppose so. Well,
Yeah.
that's why I classify that's why I classify myself as left of center rather than a leftist, because I do believe I'm more left leaning than right leaning. I agree more with the at least the social ideology of equality. But
Yeah.
again, that's something that's interesting in that I was raised or I grew up in a way that led me to believe that equality of opportunity was the goal, but I see a lot of people who want equity, which is like an enforced equality of outcome. Now, I don't know how I feel about that. On the one hand, I can understand the argument of, why are there not more female CEOs? Like that I can, or minority CEOs. That I can kind of get, because that's sort of like over the economy as a whole, and not even necessarily CEOs. It's the argument that we need more non-white men in leadership roles in the global community, or in the not global, in the wider community of like the economy and society and stuff. I get that argument, but and I've said this before, when I hear the we need more diversity in tech argument, you know, we have all these scholarships for women and minorities. So what's stopping why is the outcome not the way we want it? We need to if you truly want that to happen, instead of just imposing quotas, you need to figure out why the result isn't what you want it to be. And I don't see that. I
Yeah.
just see people advocating for the firing of white men and replacing them with non-white men, or well, people who are not white men,
Yeah. Yeah.
I should
Non-white,
say.
non-man.
Yeah,
Um, okay, I see what you mean because that's not like approaching. I mean, in terms of what you're saying, like internships or grants or something that are, designed to equalize that away from the
right.
uh, overweight of white men in tech fields. That there is something like
Something
that there is
else is
some
in play.
some barrier before the point of internships.
Right. Is it cultural? Is it educational? What is going on? Is it economic maybe? But
Yeah, it's you think it has to be like more of
well,
a grassroots sort of thing, like, or you not,
no,
well,
it's just
grassroots isn't
that
the way to say it,
it's
but it
it's
just
it's
has to,
people
the
don't
change has to happen at an earlier level or like at a more
it,
fundamental level than the ability to uh arbitrarily like assign diversity.
basically, yes. I mean, quotas are an inelegant solution to a complex problem. My issue with the left, and I'm more even though I've talked a lot of shit about the right on this show, just because Jay is probably far more left of center than I am, so we tend to talk
Lord, it's
more.
so easy to talk
When
shit
when we're
on the
when
right.
we're when we're low energy, we tend to talk more about what we agree on, and we've both noted that, and it's something we need to work on.
God, confirmation bias is so great.
But my greatest issue with the left, and this is probably because I agree with more of the ethos of their arguments than the logos, the logical reasoning, is that I understand the intent, but the problem is I don't see people asking why enough times. So it's like, okay, there aren't enough women and men in diversity. Why? Women and men in, what the hell did I just say? There aren't enough women and minorities in industry in general. Why? Okay,
Yeah.
well, women and minorities aren't making it that far. And that's where they stop. They should ask why. Okay, why are women and minorities not making that far? Okay, there's an economic factor with uh, Black Americans, I think is the appropriate term. African
Sure.
Americans, because they're not all African.
I
Black
think I think
Americans.
African American is kind of like out the window.
Yeah, because that was when I was a kid. That was the term, but I don't think it is anymore.
Yeah.
Um, there's an economic factor when it comes to Black America. With women, there's a social factor. A good woman is supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and not A, B, and C. Um, and then, okay, well, why do those exist? I don't even see. Like, I see some people make it to that second one, but I don't even see people make it past. I don't see many people make it past that. Okay, so why do these exist? Like, where does it come from? And this is what gets me the most about, to sort of radically switch gears, about the whole argument over gender. That's a big issue with me in the left, because there's this whole narrative, and I know at one point you argued it with me. I don't know if you still agree with what you said then, but about a year and a half ago, he came out and said to me, "Gender is a social construct," and this was for our college radio show. The point was to get me angry and debating, and it worked. But I don't buy that argument at all, because it doesn't. If gender is completely arbitrary, which is the supposition of the social construct argument, that it is arbitrary, well, why would something arbitrary exist? It had to have served a function at some point, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's not to say that it was like entirely just to say it's a social contract is not to say it was like arbitrated at some point, that it was engineered by like some interest.
but I see people argue it that way. There people go and make up, like, oh,
And it
um,
definitely became an interest like later on, like in terms of the theory of market segmentation, like with children's toys, like you
oh
make
yeah,
more
I
money
definitely agree,
by
but
enforcing gender.
it's expanded outside of the bounds of that, of like, oh, you shouldn't assign your kids gender at birth. Well, I call bullshit on that, and to be perfectly honest, I don't understand how the people who make the gender is a social construct argument can still be okay with the concept of trans people and having that as a medical condition, because trans people, and this is me like super duper white boy splaining, but as far as I understand it, it is a situation where chemically and structurally someone's brain matches with that of the opposite sex, or is at least more closely resembling that of the opposite sex. And so, there are two options there, and one is medication and the other is treatment, be it either through just changing how they present, how they dress, or, full on surgical. But okay, if you're okay with that, explain to me how the gender binary is purely a construct. And I wouldn't bring intersex people into that solely on the fact that, and this is going to sound mean, and I don't mean it to sound this way, solely on the fact that statistically they're a minority, a big one, or a small minority. You know what I mean. And
Yeah, yeah.
and that it is. Uh, I wish there was a better way to say it. It is an abnormality. It is a birth defect in terms of defining the body as a function. It is a defect in the function of how a body is created. It is. I'm not assigning a negative or positive value to it. It simply is, but
I mean,
it is something
defect itself
something.
has like a certain negative
Well,
value.
that's why I'm going out of my way to clarify.
Okay.
It is something happened incorrectly in the process, because a chromosomally, I don't. Well, no, now I'm getting outside of my range of expertise, like so far beyond what I know. I'm not even going to say chromosomally whether it's a thing or not. For all I know, it is. But it's not. To look at how human bodies are supposed to function, how reproduction is supposed to work, an error has occurred. is what I mean to say.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's not to
So,
disparage or, browbeat anyone, but, you know, I think the gender binary and the assigning sex at birth, it makes sense, especially when you consider the fact that there is differing biology between the sexes. And gender, or the gender roles, I suppose, gender roles and presentation make for easier processing, I suppose, easier
yeah.
guidelines of interaction.
So I'm trying to
I just
myself wrap my head on this. I think
I just unloaded a whole lot on you. So
that was a lot. Something I think you were getting at was a certain cognitive dissonance in the rhetoric of, say, the rhetoric about and the ethos about. I use rhetoric and ethos both interchangeably and too much. To say the born this way concepts, like what's been a big part of queer rights movements in the last 10 years or so
right, is that it's not a
has involved
choice.
has involved the push to say that this is like some sort of inherent part of you, that you were, born with, and that like leads, logically to think like, is this a genetic component, like, or is this like a social, like it can't necessarily be a socialized thing because Lord knows for a lot of people, grow up in an environment that does not allow for, say, homosexuality, but that doesn't stop them from feeling a certain way, so it can't possibly be socialized.
Right.
Um, or is it like, a natural, like, biological or genetic thing? And there's a lot of push to say that, like, yeah, that is, and I personally agree with that because I can't imagine how, natural tendencies to homosexuality could emerge in the most hostile possible fucking culture to it.
Right. If it
If it
was a
were
choice, why would you make it that choice when the deck
exactly,
is so clearly stacked against you?
yeah. So, but at the same time, gender being an arbitrary construct, not arbitrary construct, but a social construct, definitely gender is very much a socialized thing. It's I at least hard, if not impossible, to make a born this way argument, in terms of transgender uh, when part of the transgender argument is that gender is itself like a socialized thing, because I
Right.
think it is definitely when you grow up into it. But at the same time, like there's definitely a medicalization the of the like the dysphoria of it, because dysphoria is like a measurable
I was going to say it's a
form of,
quantifiable condition.
yeah, dysphoria is such a quantifiable condition of extreme dissonance manifesting in depression and Lord knows what other kind of like mental issues, because like somebody's uh natural like feeling of a certain gender like is misaligned to their need to present socially, in a way that does not really uh alienate them from the world. So yeah, I see what you mean on that. That's hard. Like, and it brings up the question in me, like, do I believe transgender identity is itself like an inherent, like theoretically biological or genetic thing that is really baked into the core of somebody's, personhood and their mind and their life, or if it is, uh, like, how does that exist in the same world as gender being kind of a social construct?
Right.
And I don't know, because
And
the
yeah,
gender is itself such a the gender
it's a
as a
tricky subject.
yeah, gender as a construct itself is such a dubious like menagerie of
I would
certain
yeah.
values. Like there are just certain ethical values, say, of toughness versus compassion. You can imagine the which gender either of those apply to off the top of your head. But
Right.
that I don't know, just somebody in their mind and in their heart and maybe their genetics and their personality, uh, are naturally inclined to certain values or certain just straight up visual aesthetics that are assigned to a certain gender,
Right.
without, really like subscribing to it. That's tough. So that's why, mm, and that's in my head right now as I'm talking about this. There's an alchemical reaction that is increasingly
Hmm.
uh, arguing for me, like not only to transgender values, but non-binary stuff. Gender fluidity, in that like it is just a bunch of certain values or certain like visual or lifestyle aesthetics that are theoretically a cloud of items that are socially, culturally pulled to either side of a gender spectrum, which is not even a spectrum, it's a dichotomy. Uh, but that, I don't know. So
Yeah.
what, man, I
Yeah,
don't know if
I
what I'm
threw you
saying
for a
is
loop,
making
I
a lot of,
think. No,
I
I
don't know
hear
if what
what
I'm
you're saying.
I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense to you or to any listener. I'm really going off a big, weird thread in my own
Yeah,
mind about it.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me. I understand enough. Um, and I
Yeah.
think another point I wanted to make is I don't really agree with this concept that tends to overlap with the people espousing, the whole social construct ideology of the imposition on strangers and people who they don't know, um, to call them by their proper pronouns. Like, I'm sorry, and this is I am admittedly being an asshole right now. But and again, this is the societal function that gender presentation and gender roles do serve. If you present as a man, I'm going to refer to you with male pronouns. If you present as a woman, I'm going to refer to you with a woman's pronouns. That's just it it's easier. And to impose on me someone I if I don't know you personally, if you haven't told me already that you would rather be referred to differently, do not impose that on me as a stranger. You do not assume intent where there is none. The
I
role that gender plays in a societal context is it provides easy categorization for language, especially language, depending on what language you speak, because of the gendered languages. Um,
or just like an at a glance understanding of somebody's identity. I hear where
right,
you're coming
right,
from with
and
this.
and if you present one way but identify another, how can you possibly expect a stranger to know that?
Yeah. So I see what you mean where like you would be really taken aback if you were reprimanded for misgendering someone uh, whose presentation was, not what their identity is.
Right.
And I understand to a certain extent that that is like at least a little bit problematic because that is expecting anybody to present fully at any given moment like what their identified gender is. But at the same time, I also understand where you're coming from that to like to meet somebody, to interact with somebody socially, like immediately like, and this is Christ, it's going to trivialize it. If I see a, if I see somebody wearing like a band shirt of a band I know and be like, oh shit, you listen to them, and that is assuming something based on their presentation and their appearance. And
Right.
if they, if they're like, no, I like the design on this shirt, then I'm like, oh well, my at a glance interpretation of who this
Yeah.
person was wrong. But that's very lower stakes than somebody's gender identity. So, I see what you mean, about like, I guess maybe that's like, the word for that might be cis normative or cis centric, you know,
Uh huh.
similar to like the concept of, I don't know,
Well,
ethnocentrism, the way
okay.
like
So,
white is assumed as
I,
the baseline. But so
well,
but
okay.
I, I,
I
I don't
take
think you're
issue.
wrong.
I take
I
issue
don't,
with those concepts. I will get back to those.
I don't think you're wrong to
say theoretically, if you're just meeting somebody, that you make an assessment of what their presentation is and how you probably figure that they're gendered, because you and maybe 30 years down the line this will be the case, but currently you do not approach anyone you're just meeting and
Ask
ask
their
their
pronouns.
pronouns,
No.
and ask their identity. We do live in a society where, like, you do kind of like make a superficial, like, visual assessment of like what you imagine their gender identity is.
Right, and
And if
if
it's like
someone
dead ass male
politely
presenting, you assume it's male
and if
presenting.
someone politely tells me they'd like to be referred to differently, that's fine. Don't
But if it's
assume I'm
excuse me, then you're just
exactly.
like
Like,
fucking.
don't assume I'm out to get you. Don't assume I'm some sort of asshole. I mean, I can be an asshole. Everyone can be an asshole, but just don't make intent where there is none. But sorry, I cut you off.
No, you
So
pretty much got
the
it.
idea of cis normative, I've heard that before, and I've heard it like in the context of this is a bad thing that needs to go away. The idea of cis as normal. Well, the definition of normal is, as far as I know, it's. I'm forgetting as I'm talking. It's pretty close to the idea of average.
Yeah.
The average person is cis. The vast majority of people are cis. I'm sorry, but until we reach a point where cis people are not the average, society will be cis-normative.
That's true.
Because the safest assumption is that people are cis. And while I understand the rhetoric that you don't have to explicitly gender everything, you don't have to... No, yeah, you just don't have to explicitly gender everything. Sure, that's a courtesy, but that's all it is. It's a courtesy. Again, the safest assumption is that any
Mm.
given person is cis, just through the statistics. And the same goes for white normativity, though that I have more complex feelings about because, yeah, historically, especially America, has been majority white, but
Yeah.
we're not
AKA
anymore.
ethnocentrism.
But we're not anymore, and we're increasingly more non-white as a nation. So, in this instance, I understand the push for more non-white representation and whatnot, and everything that comes with getting rid or challenging the notion of white normativity. That one I'm more on board with because the statistics back that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. Um, the statistics back that up. It's definitely like, uh, in terms of if it were a fucking pie chart or something, white normativity has less ground to stand on than cis normativity.
Well, especially
Not
in,
that
in,
they're,
in recent decades. Like, 100 years ago, it makes sense.
yeah, yeah, and
And
like in,
that sort of brings me to laugh at the people who wring their hands about America no longer being majority white and that we will suddenly be the minorities. It's like, who the fuck cares? I mean,
oh
I
my
guess
god, I
I
have a
guess
thing
I
about
guess
this.
I guess you care, but who the fuck else cares?
Ah, fuck, I gotta find it. I have a thing for this. So the extent of my research that I do for this podcast is saving posts on Tumblr that I hold on to bring up in conversation.
Uh-huh.
And I swear to God, I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it. I'm getting to Yes, here we go. Posted on Tumblr by Rifle Weeb. That is the word rifle followed by WEEB, all one word. For citations, like, go look them up. I'm as of now absolved of citing somebody. So actual genocides: the Holodomor, the Holocaust, Armenian genocide, Cambodian genocide, Rwandan genocide, uh, Srebrenica massacre. I hope I pronounced that right. Not a genocide: the slow decline of the white American population as people choose to have fewer kids due to a greatly reduced child mortality rate and lack of general necessity for additional labor on the old family farm. Definitely not a genocide: the slow decline of the white American population and rise of the mixed race American population because white women aren't tripping over themselves to have kids with the American equivalent of Japanese, quote, herbivore men. that spend their days geolocating Shia LaBeouf's He Will Not Divide Us installations and posting frog cartoons on the internet between futa hentai beat-off sessions and intense philosophical debates about whether or not liking traps makes you gay. And that was a fucking brutal jab at the alt-right in that regard, who honestly a chunk of the alt-right, and by extension, and it's a short extension, but by a short extension, white nationalist rhetoric revolves around the idea that there's a genocide going on against white people because the demographic distributions are shifting as they are wont to do. So that was my point I had about that. Talking about how do we get on that?
I went on a rant about statistics not backing up the cisnormativity being a bad thing, but statistics backing up that we may need to challenge the idea of white normativity.
Oh yeah, because
I made a joke about
into,
people wringing their hands over white people becoming a minority, which
Yep.
I mean, and I guess this is partially why the term African American became fell out of favor, because not all black people are African.
Definitely in America, probably very few of them are actually.
The idea of white being a monolith I still find it deeply amusing, and maybe this is just because I'm from my family history on one side is very Eastern European, and my family history on the other side is like Western European, or on like the border, where the borders between East and West changed a lot, like Poland, and my understanding has been there's never been a white monolith until recently. Well, I guess until the U.S. sort of invented it to justify the African slave trade, but that in Europe it's like, or even during some points in history in America, like Russians are different from Polish, and who are different from Irish, who are different from British, who are different from French, and they all hate each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm as
my grandfather would refer to Polish people with rude terms, according to my father. I did not know my grandfather very well.
Yeah.
He died while I was young, but which is ironic because my mother's side of the family is Polish and other things.
Yeah. So, and you see that everywhere, right? Like the concept of, I mean, your granddad could define XYZ people as another race that leads into what I would argue is that race is itself a lot of an arbitrary concept, and Lord knows so many other people have
I would say
written better on it.
Race is another one of those things where you can argue it's a social construct. I would say probably on a bit better grounds than the whole gender thing, because gender and sex, they coincided out of necessity of function, I would say, as
yeah, they're very
and race became a thing not so much as a necessity of function, but probably as an outgrowth of tribalism, and you don't look like me, so clearly you're different. When scientifically, save for a handful of genes being expressed differently for the superficial aspects of race, in terms of what the definition of race actually is, in terms of speciation, we're all one species.
Yeah, and I've read legally in the United States, if you have one black one black ancestor at all, you technically are you're technically black to a certain extent.
That's
legally.
kind of bullshit, because of the number of people who slept with slaves in history. I mean, that's kind of bullshit.
So race as a construct in general, relies
raped black women, I guess, as well. Oh, I mean, I guess sleeping with slaves. Sorry, I'm getting on a tangent. I was gonna say.
No, I was gonna say race as a construct relies on phenotypical and geotypical actual measurable physical differences, but it can be defined any which way you want. Like if it's on skin color, theoretically white people and East Asian people's skin colors, their complexions are not terribly different, but you have another phenotypical variation, which is the folds, the eyes, a different tissue structure in the eyes. That's what I mean.
I know what you're talking about.
It's like epilateral folds. I'm
It's
misremembering it.
I know what you're talking about.
So what I understand is that race is defined on whatever the culture or the powers that be like decide to define it on, whether that be complexion or any other phenotypical features. And or shit, you could do anything about it. You could do like cultural things. Like you could, it is a big institutionalized form of what is essentially basic tribalism, which is, of course, arbitrary. People are people. Like you're only putting up the barriers you decide to put up. But that, oh, man, I got wicked off on race theory. And literally anybody listening to this, please look up the actual origins of race, written by anyone more equipped to do that than I am. But that you said it was born out of some necessity, and I
would say gender was.
From what I understand, historically, race, the concept of race itself, was born out of the necessity of imperialism to a certain extent. That for a lot of European countries to swoop right on into XYZ other country and start, absorbing their resources and controlling their land, they had to form a narrative of race that said like, oh, we're better than them, so we have to go big dramatic air quotes help them.
I would say the way it is now, yeah, but I would push the conceptuality of it back even further. I would say it's an outgrowth of tribal society, and the functionality of tribal society. One function of a tribal society was bringing everyone together and defining, groups that you are in conflict with as not us.
Yeah.
And that certainly has something to do with geography.
That's probably where it starts, is geography.
Well, that's what
we're on this mountain, they're in this swamp.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh man.
I'm about out of things to say at this point.
Yeah, really. I don't remember where this thread came from that we've landed on race theory, but I have definitely reached the end of my rope.
All right, I guess we can call it there for now.
All right. Thank you once again for listening to the Open Discourse podcast. We are talking a bunch of hot shit all the goddamn time. You can hit us up on facebook.com/opendiscourse or open-discourse.com, where we have some articles also. Like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to give us any ideas or be on the show yourself to yell at us for being, just the worst.
The barrier to entry is pretty low. The barrier
for entry is flat. The barrier for entry is being able to message somebody on the internet. So thank you everybody once again for listening.
And
I guess we're out.
Yep.